These days, it would seem that almost everyone is talking about ADHD. And of those almost everyone's, a lot of them are talking about rejection sensitive dysphoria. But what is that? Is it even a thing? Well, this article describes it as not a mental health condition in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. And so, therefore, rejection sensitive dysphoria has no set of empirically quantifiable criteria for an official diagnosis. What's going on? Then let's look at this article, The Emotional Roller Coaster of the ADHD Brain, Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, which describes it as a term defined by William Dodson to describe the significant and often extremely painful emotional experience that many ADHD brains experience. There is no research backing for the condition, nor is it a formal diagnosis. What is going on, and who's William Dodson? We have to explore this further. From that same article, it goes on, but we can think of it as the ADHD version of rejection sensitivity, which does have significant research backing. Aha, this is more like it. And by the way, William Dodson is a board-certified psychiatrist who specializes in ADHD. So, if rejection sensitive dysphoria is the ADHD version of rejection sensitivity, we should look at rejection sensitivity, which is extreme emotional sensitivity and pain triggered by perceived failure, perceived rejection, projection of possible failure or criticism. When you have rejection sensitivity, you feel tremendous pain, anger, or depression in the face of rejection, failure, or criticism. But the real kicker here is that it doesn't have to be an actual rejection. It doesn't have to be actual rejection, failure, or criticism. Simply the perception of rejection or fear that someone will reject you can trigger the exact same feeling. The same is true of failure and criticism. The feelings don't just come up for actual failure. They can come up even when you're afraid you will fail or be criticized. And you can imagine how debilitating that might be. Perhaps you don't have to imagine it. So let's then look here. ADHD emotional dysregulation, when emotions become too much. Because what I'm suggesting is that if we begin, as we began, with what is rejection sensitive dysphoria, and then we read that it's the ADHD version of rejection sensitivity with this, one could argue, overreaction to certain things, even just thinking about them, then that would seem to imply there's an element of emotional dysregulation. Hence, we find ourselves here with this article talking about that subject. So emotional dysregulation is a common sign of ADHD, defined as a reduced ability to control emotions and related behaviors arising from those emotions. People with ADHD tend to have more frequent and intense emotional reactions compared to others. They may feel emotions very strongly or have difficulty calming down once emotionally aroused. And we have a handy graphic. I'm going to start top left and go in a clockwise direction. So emotional sensitivity, heightened reactivity to both positive and negative stimuli, difficulty self-regulating primary emotional responses, struggles with managing initial impulsive emotional reactions, difficulty self-soothing, challenges in calming down after experiencing intense emotions, emotional detachment, withdrawing emotionally as a coping mechanism, problems refocusing attention away from strong emotions, difficulty regulating secondary emotions, struggles with prioritizing and expressing appropriate emotional responses following the initial reaction. Moving on, then we have this article. Again, it mentions emotional dysregulation. See how psychologists are helping. This is from the American Psychological Association. More and more teenagers and adults are turning to social media to share their experiences. Amid that flurry of digital content, one regular theme is the idea that people with ADHD feel emotions more intensely than others, kind of what I was describing. These big feelings, as the article describes them, it turns out are not just a TikTok phenomenon. Aha, so it is a thing then, it would seem. Let's crack on. In the last 15 years or so, we've come to realise that emotional dysregulation is a key component of ADHD, says Paul Rosen, PhD, clinical psychologist and ADHD researcher at Norton Children's Behavioural and Mental Health, affiliated with the University of Louisville School of Medicine. ADHD is diagnosed as one of the three subtypes. ADHD is diagnosed as one of three subtypes. That makes better sense. Primarily hyperactive impulsive, primarily inattentive, and a combined type. Research suggests that emotion dysregulation is present in all three subtypes, though people with the combined type appear to be at greatest risk for emotional symptoms. Not all people with ADHD have emotional difficulty, but it's very common. So there we have it. So this idea of dysregulation appears to be common in ADHD, and as I suggested, that dysregulation can be, in my opinion, connected to rejection sensitivity and indeed this rejection sensitive dysphoria. There is increasing recognition of the emotional difficulties that often go along with an ADHD diagnosis in both adults and children. In Europe, an updated 2019 consensus statement published by the European Psychiatric Association listed emotion dysregulation as one of 6 fundamental features of ADHD in adults. So, this is one of 6 fundamental features of ADHD in adults. In the United States, however, which is where the DSM-5 originates from, ADHD is still defined by its keystone features of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, although the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, lists emotion dysregulation as an associated feature that supports an ADHD diagnosis. So it's there. It's just not a criterion in of itself in the DSM-5, but it is there. So that's a bit more reassuring and kind of makes more sense about why we're hearing the experience of people, the lived experience, why William Dodson has said something and others, and yet it seems to be missing in the DSM-5. Well, it's kind of missing, but it comes under this associated feature, emotion dysregulation. The emotional symptoms still are not always appreciated by clinicians or researchers, said Sarah Karolounis, PhD, Professor of Psychology at Purdue University. There's growing awareness of emotional dysregulation, but it's still overlooked. Absolutely. Some of the risk of emotion dysregulation seems to be related to the underlying neurobiology of ADHD. We know the brain networks that regulate things like attention, behavior, and impulse control are affected in kids with ADHD. These networks probably play a role in emotion regulation as well, Karolounis said. Yes, I'm sure they do. So now the reason I'm highlighting this is because, well, if it's there, if this being sensitive to rejection and this dysphoria and this emotion dysregulation is associated with ADHD, but not with everyone, then what's causing it? What is going on? So it would seem that there's something in terms of the brain, but not of everyone with ADHD, which leaves people vulnerable to this. But that's not all. Neurobiology probably is not the only factor at play. Some of the emotional difficulties may be learned responses to living with ADHD in a world designed for neurotypical brains. Yes, for instance, many people with ADHD report having difficulty receiving negative feedback. Absolutely. A phenomenon sometimes called rejection sensitivity or rejection sensitive dysphoria. There we go. So in this article, we're getting these things linked. Rejection sensitivity is less well studied than other types of emotion dysregulation, but it's easy to imagine how it might develop as a natural consequence of both hyperactive and inattentive behaviour. Kids with ADHD get a lot of negative attention from parents and teachers, Rosen noted. They are also more likely to face rejection from peers, perhaps because of habits like interrupting, making impulsive comments, or being lost in their own worlds. When kids get all that negative attention, they respond with negative emotions and it becomes a feedback loop. Definitely, Rosen said. He didn't say definitely, I said definitely. But he probably would have done. These are kids who are sensitive to criticism and things going badly because they get a lot of criticism and experience a lot of things going badly. So these are kids who are sensitive to criticism and things going badly because they get a lot of criticism and experience a lot of things going badly. Makes absolute sense to me, at least when you think about it. So we have then this classic nature-nurture, a predisposition in terms of the neural makeup of these individuals, and also probably for a lot of them, what is happening in terms of the environment. And we know that the environment can impact us greatly at times. And then, just to finish this off, evidence of emotion dysregulation as a core symptom of ADHD, a systematic review, and this is from 2023. Overall, anomalous activation patterns are observed in adults with ADHD compared to adults without ADHD. It is well known that the anterior cingulate cortex integrates attentional, mnemonic, and emotional information and activates the DLPFC, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which promotes decision-making based on emotional and objective information. Abnormal activation patterns seen in ADHD may interfere with emotional processing from the beginning, biasing attention toward emotional salient stimuli. And my interpretation of that is that this could mean that when we're looking at emotional and objective information in terms of decision making, maybe the emotional part is given much more, let's say, focus, much more weight and weighting. And this could skew decisions, it could skew behaviors and actions. Therefore, overall, just to recap, we have this term that is bandied about online, this rejection sensitive dysphoria. By the way, dysphoria, if you've ever wondered what that is, a real shorthand way to think about it is the opposite of euphoria. And then we've got this idea of people who are rejection sensitive, and then this idea of emotion or emotional dysregulation. And indeed, it would seem that people with ADHD are prone to that. It's not everyone. And so, yeah, it isn't just a TikTok thing. It is there. And if you've experienced it, you will know 1000% that it is real, and it is, well, it can make life difficult at times.